At the start of the movie, we meet Catalina, an American food vendor who operates from a car stationed by the roadside. Her life takes a surprising turn when she's contacted to be the personal chef for a rich family in Ireland for a week. Excited and curious, she decides to make the trip. Upon her arrival in Ireland, she's astounded by the grandeur of the residence she's to work in. It closely resembles a castle with its majestic design and vast courtyard. However, her entry to the residence was not as smooth as she'd hoped. She's confronted by a man, Rory, who manages the estate. He mistakenly assumes she's there for personal reasons and tries to send her away. But amidst the confusion, she discovers a shocking revelation. One of the home's inhabitants is Hawk, someone she recognized from New York. She remembers him as a regular customer who used to buy food from her. What's even more surprising is that they had once shared an intimate evening together. Now she finds out that he's not just any regular guy but Lord James, the son of an Irish noble. James had his reasons for disguising himself as an ordinary person in New York. He wanted to connect with people without the weight of his title and family reputation getting in the way. When he explains to Catalina that he invited her solely because of her culinary expertise, she feels a mix of surprise and embarrassment. She had no idea about his true identity when they were in New York. When Catalina contemplates leaving due to the misunderstandings, James shares with her the real reason behind her invitation. His grandmother, a formidable figure from London, plans to visit soon. She has intentions to sell the Grand Castle, but James deeply cherishes his ancestral home and doesn't want that to happen. He believes that Catalina's exceptional cooking, combined with her charismatic presence, might just be the thing to sway his grandmother's decision. Catalina, touched by the sincerity in James's story, resolves to stay and face the challenge. She's determined to do her best, even if it means dealing with the skeptical Rory for a week. As the day wraps up, Rory reluctantly leads her to the quarters where she'd be staying. In the grand living room of the castle, Catalina and Rory run into Mr. Perry. Rory attempts to introduce Catalina, but she, perhaps due to excitement or nervousness, preemptively extends her hand for a shake. Rory, sensing it might be inappropriate, intervenes. Mr. Perry, noticing her unusual behavior, warns Rory to keep an eye on Catalina so she doesn't disturb the home's harmony. Before showing her to her room, Rory takes Catalina to the kitchen, where they meet Finn, the house chef. As they continue on, Rory lays out the cooking plans and expectations for Catalina's week-long stay. Just as they are settling into the room, a sudden commotion erupts from the courtyard. It's Mrs. Edwina, who has arrived earlier than expected. When Mrs. Edwina sees Catalina, her curiosity is piqued. Eager to make a good impression, Catalina moves to greet her. But Rory, aware of the formalities, gently pulls her back, making sure she kneels as a sign of respect before introducing her. Despite the awkward greeting, Catalina promises Mrs. Edwina that she'll be wowed by her cooking. By the time afternoon rolls around, the kitchen is bustling with activity as they prepare for lunch. In the midst of all this, Lord James makes a rather startling entrance into the kitchen, appearing without proper attire. Not fazed by the moment, he invites Catalina to join them for the afternoon meal with Mrs. Edwina. Realizing she doesn't have the right clothes for such an occasion, Lord James offers her some of his late mother's dresses to wear. During this exchange, Catalina's curiosity about Rory's background arises. Upon asking, she learns that Rory grew up in an orphanage and had been taken in by Lord James's kind-hearted mother. Before the meal began, Catalina couldn't resist capturing the beautiful spread of dishes with her camera. Rory, ever the stickler for rules and formality, tried to instruct Catalina on the intricacies of high society table manners. However, Lord James, with a more relaxed attitude, encouraged Catalina to just be herself. As lunch commenced, Mrs. Edwina began appreciating the dishes, clearly prepared with finesse and skill. Catalina, in contrast, garnered attention when she drank her tea using regular, everyday methods. Mrs. Edwina showed her disapproval, but Lord James quickly stepped in to defend Catalina, joking that his grandmother sure liked to talk a lot. This didn't sit well with Mrs. Edwina, and she further probed Catalina about her background. With straightforward confidence, Catalina shared about her American roots and her father's occupation as a used car salesman. As Lord James chimed in, trying to bridge the conversation, an unintentional revelation about the shared night between him and Catalina emerged. Mortified, Mrs. Edwina promptly left the room. Later that evening, Catalina documented her experiences of the day, uploading photos and sharing stories. The following day, Rory accompanied Catalina on a trip to the local market. To Catalina, markets were like treasure troves, where chefs could find inspiration and fresh ingredients. As she explored, she stumbled upon a cheese stall run by Source. To Catalina's surprise, Source and Rory shared a past, both having grown up in the same orphanage. After trying a few cheese samples, Catalina was so impressed that she decided to purchase the lot, and she enlisted Source's help in serving them at the mansion the next day. In the afternoon, Rory showcased some of his culinary skills, serving dishes he prepared himself for Mrs. Edwina and Mr. Perry. To their delight, the dishes were scrumptious, very much akin to Catalina's offerings. This didn't surprise Lord James, who had always been a fan of Catalina's cooking. Later, seizing the opportunity, he invited Catalina for some outdoor fun, archery in the vast gardens of the estate. Rory, a bit envious of their bonding, hoped to join, but Lord James firmly dissuaded him. The afternoon saw Lord James and Catalina bonding over archery and golf, with unmistakable chemistry between them. There had always been whispers about Lord James's reputation as a charming playboy around the town. Yet his recent interactions with Catalina seemed to hint at a possible change in his demeanor. That evening took an unexpected turn. As Catalina was in the midst of her shower, there was an urgent knock on her door. To her surprise, it was Rory, desperately seeking her help. He had a plan to disable Mrs. Edwina's car, preventing her risky solo trip to town the next morning. Though hesitant, Catalina eventually agreed to assist. In the charged atmosphere of the moment, the two shared a lingering look, seemingly on the brink of a more intimate connection. However, the moment was interrupted by the sudden appearance of Finn and Cillian. The group, finding humor in the situation, decided to relax in the mansion's large bathtub. Lord James, happening upon the scene, felt a twinge of jealousy at seeing Catalina so close to Rory, and swiftly withdrew from the scene. Later, outside the mansion, Catalina eagerly awaited the arrival of Source, who was delivering the cheeses. As she waited, she struck up a conversation with Mr. Perry. Source's arrival seemed to enchant Mr. Perry, who was visibly smitten. This marked change in his behavior amused Catalina. Throughout their time in the kitchen, Mr. Perry couldn't take his eyes off Source, clearly enamored by her. Before she could leave, Mr. Perry, caught in the throes of newfound admiration, invited Source to the evening's dance, much to everyone's surprise. To summarize, the afternoon was filled with tension and romance. The dance floor saw Mr. Perry and Source sharing a dance, while Lord James took the opportunity to pull Rory aside, warning him to not meddle in his budding relationship with Catalina. As the evening progressed, Lord James also took his chance to dance with Catalina. However, this dance was short-lived, as Mrs. Edwina stepped in to take her place, prompting Rory to dance with Catalina instead. Lord James couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy upon seeing their close bond. Despite this, Mrs. Edwina seemed appreciative of the lively atmosphere that Catalina brought to the household. Both men, Rory and Lord James, were unmistakably drawn to Catalina, captivated by her charm and aura. In a bid to avoid the escalating tension between the two, Catalina excused herself. Later in the evening, as she was explaining her dishes to Rory, they were interrupted by a hungry Mr. Perry. This led to a heart-to-heart, where Mr. Perry opened up about the close-knit family life he once had and how it had been disrupted following his wife's demise. This candid discussion made it evident that Mr. Perry deeply missed the warmth and unity that once characterized his family. The moment grew even more familial when Mrs. Edwina entered, sampling and appreciating Catalina's culinary creations. It was a sight to behold, a once fragmented family now bonding over a meal. However, the mood shifted when Lord James stepped in, determined to have some alone time with Catalina, and once again asserting his authority over Rory. The two headed to a nearby cafe where Lord James, in a moment of vulnerability, confessed his feelings for Catalina. While he had known many women, Catalina was the only one who made him contemplate change and introspection. Overwhelmed by emotion, Lord James leaned in for a kiss. However, Catalina gently rebuffed him, signaling she wasn't ready for such a commitment. Respecting her wishes but clearly disheartened, Lord James left the cafe. The following day, the scandalous photograph splashed across online media channels, causing a significant stir, especially within the confines of the grand residence. Mrs. Edwina, always concerned about the reputation and integrity of her family, was livid upon seeing Lord James and Catalina in such an intimate situation. Mr. Perry, on the other hand, took a more protective stance. He saw Catalina as a refreshing presence, a light that brought warmth and cohesion to a home that had been cold and fragmented for too long. The picture ignited Rory's insecurities, amplifying his envy, and leading him to hastily exit the residence. When Catalina tried to clarify the events of the previous evening and shed light on the nature of the photograph, she was met with another hurdle. Mrs. Edwina had invaded her privacy, delving into the personal contents of Catalina's laptop. She discovered drafts and notes that hinted at the possibility of a book about the family. Feeling betrayed, Mrs. Edwina construed Catalina's intentions as deceptive. In her eyes, Catalina had used her growing closeness with Lord James as a means to gain unrestricted access to the family's inner workings, with the aim of publishing an unauthorized account. Despite Catalina's earnest attempts to articulate her genuine intentions and explain the context of her writings, Mrs. Edwina's mind was made up. The matriarch issued a stern directive, asking Catalina to pack up and leave immediately. Desperate for an ally and seeking comfort, Catalina went in search of Rory in the kitchen. She hoped to find solace and perhaps a chance to make him understand the truth behind the online photo and the writings on her laptop. However, Rory's feelings of betrayal and jealousy clouded his judgment. He jumped to conclusions, assuming that Catalina was naturally more inclined to choose a relationship with Lord James due to his noble lineage. Disheartened, Rory told Catalina that her time in the residence had come to an end, suggesting she return to her homeland. Catalina left the mansion with a heavy heart. During her walk, she happened upon the local market and encountered Source. Nearby, Finn was explaining to Source everything that had transpired at the mansion. Through their discussion, Catalina pieced together the underlying reason she had been invited by Lord James. It was to lift Mrs. Edwina's spirits and persuade her to reconsider selling the mansion. Instead of leaving town feeling defeated, Catalina hatched a new plan. She decided to bring the vibrant life of the market right to Lord James's doorstep. To set her idea in motion, she collaborated with Source and another friend. They created flyers and distributed them all around town, announcing a special market event in the mansion's garden. To make the occasion even more enticing, they decided to offer complimentary meals to the attendees. On the day of the event, the garden of the mansion transformed. It was teeming with stalls, vendors, and a large crowd, all reminiscent of the lively local marketplace. Mrs. Edwina, Mr. Perry, and Lord James returned to find their once serene garden buzzing with activity, and were taken aback by the unexpected scene. Source approached Mr. Perry, who had often felt distant from the community. She aimed to bridge that gap, helping him realize the importance of being part of the local community. Meanwhile, Catalina took it upon herself to speak with Mrs. Edwina. She presented her a draft of a cookbook she was working on, which featured stories and recipes from Mrs. Edwina's family. Catalina shared an idea with Mrs. Edwina. Instead of selling the grand house, why not turn parts of it into communal spaces? She envisioned it as a bustling marketplace or a popular picnic spot. This would not only preserve the home but also fill it with life and energy, dispelling the isolation the family had felt for so long. Mrs. Edwina found the idea appealing and discussed it with Mr. Perry and Lord James. Both of them were supportive. It was settled. The house would remain with them, but now open to the community. As for Lord James, he chose to step away from his noble life to explore the world like an average person, hoping to find love elsewhere since Catalina had turned him down. Catalina, on the other hand, found her heart drawn to Rory. As these decisions were made, the story reached its conclusion. The moral of the story is when life gives you mansions, turn them into bustling markets.